Just to be makdim, to preface, the way to get ready for every yontiv, I know it's good to know about the yontiv and why we celebrate each yontiv, but what we've learned from our Rabbeim is the best way to prepare for a yontiv is to learn the halachas of the yontiv. That's what Rabbi Salanter taught us, and that's what Yidden have been doing for ages. You want to know how to get into a yontiv, you learn the halachas of the yontiv. When it comes to Purim specifically, I think there's a little bit more of getting ready for the yontiv by learning the halachas of the yontiv, and the reason for that is Purim is different than most Yom Tovim in the sense that Klal Yisrael accepted the Torah again. They had a Kabbalah Torah Me'ahava, an appreciation for the Torah that they didn't have until now. And for that reason, one of the main ways to connect to the Yontiv is by learning, is by appreciating the Torah that there is. There is a lot of good feelings on Purim that we want to share. And ultimately, it's a closeness with Hashem that we want to have. And we hear this many times in Yeshiva, that the only way to really get close to Hashem is by understanding Him. And the only way to understand Hashem is by learning His Torah. So having some form of Torah insight and something that, could really bring out the depth of what we have in Torah, I believe is a very good way of preparing ourselves for the Yontiv, giving us a gishmak, I would say, in the Yontiv. And I hope that this will do that. And at least if we have a chance, I'd like to make sure by the end of this that we say over a little bit more chizuk to this. So I thought we could do is we'll take probably one of the most famous psukim in the Megillah, and we'll see how many halachas we could get out of it when it seems to be a seemingly simple, innocuous, 4 words, and how much Chazal taught us from this. So on page 1, the pasuk teaches us, "Vayom mashenachu bahem haYehudim me'ivayim, v'chodesh asher nepach lehem miyagin l'simcha u'me'evel yomtiv." On the days that the Yidden stopped fighting with their enemies, and in the month that Hashem switched over from tragedy to simcha and from mourning to Yom Tov, Lasei Saisam, to make those days as Yemei Mishteh v'Simcha, days of festival and happiness. And then the 4 words are going to be focusing on Mishloach Manos Aish l'Re'ehu, and sending presents, a man to his friend. Umatanes Levyonim. Mishloach Manos Aish l'Re'ehu. That's the mitzvah, divrei Kabbalah, more than just the stam din derabanan. There's a mitzvah for us to give presents to our friend. So right under that, we have the Gemara. The Gemara is a Gemara in Daf Zayin in Megillah, which says, Tani Rabbi Yosef, the underlined part, Umishloach Manos Aish l'Re'ehu, giving presents, sending presents, a man to his friend, Shtei Manos l'Ish Echad. 2 presents, 1 guy. That's your mitzvah. Umatanes Levyonim, what is that? Shtei matanes l'shnei bnei adam. 2 presents to 2 people. Rashi explains that means 1 and 1. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. So here we go. Here's a story about Shalach Manos. And this is where we're going to try to focus on is what exactly is called Shalach Manos. What can I send? What can't I send? To whom can I send? And many other ideas that we'll be able to try to pluck out just from those 4 words. Umishloach Manos Aish l'Re'ehu. So the story goes like this. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, Rabbi Yehuda was a nobleman, a nasi. Shadar leil Rabbi Oishia, he sent to Rabbi Oishia, Itma de Igla Tilsa, a piece of a calf that was 3rd. Tilsa means like a special cut, a 3rd from the mother's stomach. It's known to be, it's the best. You could ask the olim that knows. V'garv de chamra, and a jug of wine. Shalach lei, he sent to him, Kiyamtem banu rabbeinu Mishloach Manos Aish l'Re'ehu. You were Mekayim, you did it, you did the mitzvah. Okay, seems like a pretty simple Gemara. It's hard to know what's the Gemara teaching us. The Gemara has 1 more word. It says Umatanis Levyonim and Matanis Levyonim. So now this already, just right off the bat, just to speak this question out. Can one be Mekayim Matanas of Yonim and Mishloach Manos together? If let's say you give Shalach Manos, you give two manos to one ani. So were you now Yoitze Matanas of Yonim because you gave an ani a present, and Shalach Manos because you gave him two presents, two manos. So the goin over here in that little aleph is the same. The goin and the bach, they both take out the words Matanas of Yonim, seemingly because they learn that you can't be Yoitze both. You can't be Yoitze your obligation for Shalach Manos and your obligation for Matanas of Yonim at the same time. You would have to have probably either two separate givings or at the most three separate people, right? Two aniyim and another person to give Shalach Manos to. Okay. So that's really the model of what we have for Shalach Manos. The model of Shalach Manos is, if you want to give Shalach Manos, what do you give? You give an egel, you give meat, and a bottle of wine. Okay. Rashi on the previous amud, on the top of the page, Rashi says, what does manos mean? Does anyone know what manos means? Normally, the word mane means, someone said a portion? Yeah, a portion. Normally it means a portion. Rashi says manos means mine ma'adanim, types of, I don't know, luxuries, pleasantries. So Rashi is learning that when the pasuk says Shalach Manos, that you should send two things. I can't tell what it is. When Rashi says Shalach Manos, he doesn't mean two portions. Rather, he means two different types of things, two different mine ma'adanim. Okay, so we're going to get back to this in the Shulchan Aruch. So basically, from what we've learned, we should be able to now paskin. What do we give for Shalach Manos? So if we turn to page, page 3, in the middle column, it says Hilchas Megillah Siman Tafresh Tzadi Dalid. By the Dalid in Shulchan Aruch, it says Chayev l'shleich lechaveroi shtei manos basar. You have to send to your friend two portions of meat. Oy shel mine machalim, or types of food. Shenemar u'mishloach manos ish l're'ehu. Like the pasuk teaches us, u'mishloach manos ish l're'ehu. Shtei manos leish. The next picture, leish echad. Two manos, whatever manos means. Either the first way the Shulchan Aruch says is two portions of basar, or two types of food. And then he says, V'chol hamar b'lishleach l'reim meshubach. Whoever gives a lot, they're going to be praiseworthy. And then he continues, Im ein lo, if he doesn't have, he should switch with his friend a suda, machlef im chaveroi, zeh shalech lazeh sudasoi, v'zeh shalech lazeh sudasoi. If a person doesn't have enough to give Shalach Manos, so find someone else who doesn't have enough and just switch the food you were planning on eating that day. Okay. So far, what we have is simple. Anything that doesn't seem right. Simply, all you have to do is you have to give two things to one guy. There was two ha'aris, I think, that we saw was shnei manos basar, two portions of meat, or shnei mine machalim, or two different types of food. So that we have to figure out why that should be.
Meaning types and like not two portions.
Yeah, mine is different than manos. Manos are portions. You can't have two types of basar. Meat is meat, and then or two different types of food. That's what the Shulchan Aruch is saying. And then in the Haggadah, in that piece, he says v'yesh l'shleach manos b'yom v'lei b'layla. The Ramah says you should send that day and not at night. If you send manos to your friend, and he doesn't want to accept it, or he's moichel yatsa. That means I go to someone, I give him a Shalach Manos, and he says, no thanks, I'm not interested, I'm good. So, are you Yoitze Shalach Manos or not? And the Ramah paskins you are. And this opens up probably the most famous shaila that people have about Shalach Manos, which is, you could ask it in this way, but we'll speak it out really. How the Chassam Sofer speaks it out is, what was the reason that Chazal, or I would say Esther, and because it's already a takana of the Nevi'im from the pasuk in Esther, what was the reason that they were masakin to made this enactment of Shalach Manos? Yeah, because very good, because we need to be happy, and giving makes us happy. And the Chassam Sofer brings, this is on page. Oh, before we get to the Chassam Sofer, let me just first point out the machlekes. We said just now that the Ramah says that if you accept something, if you don't accept it, you just say I'm good, you're still Yaitse. And the Pri Chadash, which is on page 3, on the top right corner, Pri Chadash says, Machala Yotza, where that finger is, Machala Yotza, Tema Dezeminayin Lai. How does he know that? Who told the Ramah? We saw the Gemara that talks about Shalach Manos. We saw basically everything there is to see about Shalach Manos, and the Gemara never says that if a guy doesn't accept it, he's Yaitse. How did the Ramah know that if he doesn't accept it, he's Yaitse? What does it say in the pasuk? You gotta give something to your friend. You didn't do it. Just because he said, I don't want it, now you're Yaitse? So the Chassam Sofer, and that's on page 4, explains that maybe this machlekes, the Ramah, who says you're not Yaitse, who says you are Yaitse if you don't accept it, and the Pri Chadash who says you're not Yaitse if you don't accept it, is a machlekes between the Trumas Hadeshen. This machlekes is a machlekes between the Trumas Hadeshen and the Manos Halevi. Okay, this is a very, I would say, novel chiddush of the Chassam Sofer. In the second paragraph, the left-hand paragraph on page 4, on top, he says, "V'hinei ra'isi bazeh beis taimin." I saw 2 reasons why we do Shalach Manos. First of all, b'Trumas Hadeshen, kasav, kedei sheyu harvacha lebalei simchas, so that the people who are having their simcha should have a lot. Uloi leyaspik leisudasai harei chaver misayah. If a guy doesn't have enough food for his suda, the whole day people are coming into his house, they're stopping by, and because they're going to be stopping by, they're going to want to have more food, you're going to run out of food, so you have extra food for Shalach Manos for your suda. Afilu islay tuva, even if a guy has a lot, mikal makom tiknu kash le'vayshay misha einlay. The chiddush of the Chassam Sofer, he says that maybe even if a person does have a sufficient amount, but just in case there was someone who wouldn't have a sufficient amount, they said that everyone should get Shalach Manos. That's the first way, and that's the Trumas Hadeshen. Then he says, a little bit further, two lines later, B'Sefer Manos Halevi al Megillas Esther. In the Sefer Manos Halevi, which was written by Reb Shlomo Al-Kabitz, the Kabbalist, the Baal Mechaber of L'Chadaydi, he was writing a Sefer to explain really the Megillah. He wasn't writing a Sefer as a halachic source, which is why I think this is a greater chiddush of the Chassam Sofer to say this. But he says, B'Sefer Manos Halevi al Megillas Esther, Kasav, he writes, Laharbis Hashalim V'Areus, like Jonathan said. The reason is to have more happiness and peace between each other. Hepach mirgilasay shalei yetzer she'amar mefuzer mefurid. The opposite of what Haman was trying to do. Haman was trying to separate all of Klal Yisrael. The Yetzer Hara wants to separate all of Klal Yisrael. And therefore, what we're doing with the Simcha of Purim is, instead of being separate, mefuzer mefurid, amongst all the nations, scattered around, we come together and we create more camaraderie and happiness. He says he explains that in the place where they would have been separate and scattered about, that's why they were masakin Shalach Manos. So 2 simple basic reasons why do we have Shalach Manos. According to the Trumas Hadeshen, the reason for Shalach Manos is because if a person may not have enough for the Suda, so we have to give him extra for the Suda. And the second reason, the Manas Halevi of Shem Al-Kabitz, his reasoning is to make people happy. Comes the Chassam Sofer and he says, with this, maybe we could explain this machlekes, the Ramah and the Pri Chadash. Im kein yesh leimer, kivan sheshalach v'hirachi basai. Since I sent something to you, and I'm showing that I love you, I care about you, I send you something, even though the other one doesn't accept it, did I accomplish showing that I love you? Yes. The Manas Halevi would be very proud of you and say that you are Yotze Shalach Manos. Kvar Yotze Yidei Chavasa. However, that would be pshat according to the Ramah. However, according to the Pri Chadash that says you're not Yotze, what's the reason for the Shalach Manos? To give for the Suda. If a person says no thank you, have you given for the Suda or not? No, you haven't given. If you didn't add to a Suda, you haven't accomplished that which Chazal said. And okay, so the Chassam Sofer basically lays out this machlekes, and I would say most of the Purim Torah that is spoken about Shalach Manos is based on these two ideas. Is the reason for Shalach Manos for Marbe Reis, to make people happy, and therefore, even if you don't accept it, let's say, you're still doing that? Or is it for the Suda? And if the guy doesn't have for a Suda, then you haven't been Yetzer. We'll call that the Machlekes, the Trumas Hadeshin, and the Manas Halevi. And just to speak out, there's a lot of Machlekesim that we could, a lot of different nafkaminas, I would say, that we could maybe ask about this. The Trumas Hadeshin, where he's saying that the reason for the Shalach Manos is for the Suda, is coming to answer a different question. In those times also, it was common that someone would want to send Shalach Manos. You don't just send, what's the classic Shalach Manos? A hamantashen and a can of Coke? I don't know, it depends. No? The looks like I'm really inventive over here. A hamantashen. Okay. Let's call it a hamantash and a can of Coke. So if you do that, you want to show a little bit more geschmack. So besides for sending it with that, you send with it something nice, like a nice present along with it. So the Trumas Hadeshin wants to know, that's on page 1. Bnei Adam asholchim lechavereim bepurim chalukim v'sadinim. Nice clothing or things like that. Yotzim midei Mishloach Manos I love. Are they Yotzim Mishloach Manos or not? And the truth is, it's a pella to think in the first place. Why would someone think that you should be Yotze Shalach Manos by sending clothing? Very good. So Avi's saying, well, if you're doing it to be nice, so then whatever you send should be good, should be called being nice. I hear that. But where do we have source for such a thing within either the Megillah or the Gemara that someone could send something other than food? The concept we said, Shalach Manos means portions. Two portions, or mine madan in the way Rashi explained it, two luxuries, two nice things, niceties, that's a word or not? I don't know. But where would you get even the Havamina to say that you could be able to send such a thing? And for that reason, Trumas Hadeshin says, of course you're not Yotze, because the point of it is food for the Suda. The Chassam Sofer wants to say, well, maybe the Manas Halevi, who's on the bottom of the page, on the bottom right, he says, in the underlined part, Mishloach Manos lihikoel kol echad im chaveroi. Just to have everyone together. So as long as people are together and happy, that would possibly be one nafkamina. Okay? One nafkamina would be, can you send non-food items for Shalach Manos? Maybe that would explain why when you get a nice Shalach Manos in the mail, it always has all these extra stuff inside. Because they're trying to be Yotze like the Manas Halevi also. They're adding geschmack to it. If you were only to get those things, you wouldn't be Yotze like the Trumas Hadeshin, but maybe it helps for the Manas Halevi. Now, what about, let's just speak out a few more nafkaminas, and then we'll get to other very interesting halachas that come out from this. On page 6, the last page, in the the second section, Bays. That's an excerpt from the Bear Hativ in Shulchan Aruch in Tafresh Tzadi Hey in the halachas of Mishloach Manos. He says over there, Basar Ois Zayin on the first line of that of the section Bays, Mevushul Haroy La'achila. If you want to send meat, it's got to be ready to eat, like the Maril says. V'hu adin mashke, and even drink, like the Shalah says. Then he says the next thing, which tell me what the Olam thinks. Hasheleach ma'ois ksus v'kelim b'shvil manos. Someone who sends money or clothing or vessels as the manos. Mahani. I skipped a bunch of words. It works. So people want to say this is a raya to the Manas Alevi. That you see the reason that you see, he says beferish, that you could send these things, kalim and clothing and things like that, to be Yitzhak for Shalach Manas. So he's quoting, if you see it a little bit towards the end of the line, he says, Halachas Katanas Chelik Beis Simin Kuf Samach Gimel. So people want to say that you see from the Halachas Katanas that you're allowed to send this other type of stuff. However, those who do quote that are misquoting it, because there's a sentence in between that. He says, "Im yachol lemoichra miyad liknois letzorech suda mehani." If you're able to sell it in order to use this money as something for the suda, then that's when it works. So it's clear that, I think at least, that we don't have a raya, we don't have anyone that speaks about sending just an object as a shalach manas. It has to be food. And even the halachas ketanas, which they're trying to quote, is saying that it has to be for the suda.
We even argue that these three things could be sarke suda.
Kalim?
Kalim for the suda, clothes to not look nicer for the suda.
Even if they were letzarchei suda, they might not necessarily accomplish what the halacha is. Meaning, letzarchei suda would, the way I'm understanding is, manos means portions or some type of food stuff. And therefore, even if they get the reasoning, they give you a geshmak in the food, they give you a geshmak, but they're still missing an integral factor, which is the food stuff. So even though you're right, it is the tzarchei suda, they could have been the tzarchei suda, but he makes it clear that you have to sell them in order to buy things the tzarchei suda. So right now we don't have anyone really who specifically goes with the tzad of Manas Alevi, that you could just send non-food items. Now, what would happen according to the Ramah, that you need to have something for the Suda, right? According to the way we're understanding, is that everyone's saying you need to have something for the Suda. So why would it be, according to the Ramah, that you could say no thank you? What would be the pshat? You're not actually having something for the Suda. So to explain this, well, maybe we'll first point out on page 6 on the top, there in the Aleph, there's a quote from the Levush. Levush is more contemporary. He brings the first line. You have to send at least 2 manos to one person. And the manos and those things should be food or drink. Because when manos always means food or drink. He says clearly that the reason for the shalach manas is so that people should have enough to make them happy to be misameach on Purim. So the levush is paskening like which way? Like the Chassam Sofer brought from the Trumas Hadeshen, the reasoning is for having a good suda. But then if you skip to the next paragraph, or whatever, the left side, second line, if you send it and he doesn't want to accept it, you're still yaitze. How do we make these two things work? The only way that we tried saying before that there are two separate halachas, like the Sam Sefer says, according to the Mandamar who holds the reason is for your Suda. So if you have something that's for the Suda, good. If it's just to be Marbereus, it doesn't have to come to the Suda. But according to the way that the Levush is paskening, the reason why you're doing it is for the reason why you're sending it is for the Suda. And Afal Pikein, even so, he allows, like the Ramah, for a person to be Meichel. So to explain this, we have a beautiful idea from the Binyan Tzion. Binyan Tzion is on page 5. This Binyan Tzion says, he brings, you try to scroll through this, the underlines on the right side, he brings Arama, and then he brings the Chsam Sefer towards the middle, Chsam Sefer that we just said with two reasons, and he says, I'll tell you a different reason. Kemoisha Kosov is the 3 lines down from the bottom right column. Kemoisha Kosov, like it says, Mishloach Manos, and sending presents. Veloiksiv v'nosan manos. It doesn't say giving; it says sending. By matanis lavyonim, it says you actually have to give something. In order to give something, it has to be accepted. But sending nesina shayach gabe manos. K'dichsiv v'nosan lefnina manos ulachana yitain mana achas apayim mizeh. So you see that you could have theoretically said the expression of nasan even by manos. It's not because of the word manos that we said mishlayach. Rather, nira delay hikbid hakosav ella ala shiluach dahainu sheyitzim mishlayach. The only thing that the Torah expected from you, that Chazal needed from you when you do shalach manos, is to send from you presents to someone else. What type of presents? Food stuff. Something for the Suda. Basically what we did is we said that there's a halacha called shalach manos, which means you must send mishlayach manos. 2 types of presents or something like that, mishlayach manos, to someone else. So as long as you've done that, even if they didn't accept it, you were mekayim your mitzvah of shalach manos. Okay? So basically, if we have this in our mind, all the famous nafkaminas between the Manas Halevi and the Trumas Hadeshin, they fall apart. Let me just speak out some of them. People want to say, let's say I send the Shalach Manos, it's very common. You send your Shalach Manos to someone and they're not home. So what do? You leave it by the door, right? You come home after your Suda and there's like a pile of Shalach Manos there. And you start bringing them all in. Now, a lot of people, they don't write who the Shalach Manos is from, right? Well, sometimes people don't write who the Shalach Manos is from. So if you get a Shalach Manos and you don't know who it's from, was that person Mekayim Shalach Manos or not? So if it's something to help for your Suda only, people want to say, like the way, let's say the Trumas Hadeshin, it still helped for your Suda in theory. You just never sue that home or whatever. But if it's to be marbe reis, if I don't know who it's coming from, who am I becoming more friendly with? So there are those who want to say that maybe there's a nafkamina. But like what we're saying, this is not a nafkamina. Because of course we want to be marbe reis through food stuff. So it would be most appropriate for someone to write his name, that he's the one who's sending this, and at the same time, but he's the one who's sending this, and it's something that could be used for the Suda. That would be one example where people say there is a machlekes, maybe the Trumas Hadeshin and the Manas Halevi, but we don't have to say that's a machlekes. We could say everyone would agree it would be better for it to have some type of writing. Okay. That's really just the Agdama. Those are the 2 ideas that people talk about when it comes to Shalach Manos, the Manas Halevi and the Trumas Hadeshin. And really, I think the right way to say it, at least the way I understand it, is that it's really all one shita. You have to give some types of foods, that's marberes between me and you. And even if you don't accept it, at least it's showing that I wanted to give to you something good. Okay. In that same Binyan Tzion on page 5, he says, by the second finger, Misha mevi ba'atzmei manos v'noisen lechaverim yatsa. If someone himself is the one who gives the Mishloach Manos, is he yotzer or not? We say the shliach of a person is like him, so therefore, maybe it should also be a shliach. We never find that I could be like my shliach, and if the Torah wanted specifically Mishloach Manos for me to send it, maybe I should have to use a shliach dafka. And he brings, I'm surprised that no one says that you should specifically say that. The Mishnah Berurah brings this in the Mishnah Berurah that maybe there's a reason to want to send it specifically al yedei shliach. It's not something I would say necessarily, this is not a halachic shir, but the Binyatzion's learning from this word mishloach, right now we said two halachas that we learned. First of all, mishloach means that you should send something. Lav dafka, it doesn't specifically have to be that he accepts it. And second of all, it should be sent through a shliach. And the question really is, if we understand the concept of Mishloach Manos, that it's to make people happy or whatever, why is it specifically that it should be sent through a shliach? How does that make people more happy?
Pay money for a shliach.
Because you have to pay money, so you're saying I'm wasting more money on someone. Depends what type of, I think there's some people here that would be upset if you wasted money on them. So, yeah.
I heard the shot like you're getting a third person involved.
You're getting another person involved to the Mishloach Manos. I hear. It's a nice pshat. Maybe because they're having a third person involved in it, so there's more reis, there's more people. Yeah. Huh? Covered? Because like you get a chashuv shliach. I hear. What happens if you get someone who's not a chashuv shliach? It's important. What if Chaim's saying the pshat is because it's covered? You're bringing a chashuv shliach to send it. What happens if he's not a chashuv shliach? Yeah. Would it be called mevazim if you send? This shaila is a shaila that Chassam Sofer and the Kiv Eger talked about. Chassam Sofer and Gittin, believe it or not. Chassam Sofer and Gittin, Chav Beis and Beis. That's on our page over here. It's 6 on page 6. The Gimel. V'da v'hovein. Kol ma she'amru Chazal pleni bar shlichus ha'einu bar shlichus. Whenever we talk about someone, if he is a shliach or he's not a shliach, hainu ratzalemer bar shlichus kemoisai ha'einu bar shlichus kemoisai. Is he a shliach that's like him? That means I'm a bardas, so my shliach has to be a bardas like me. Aval shliach afilu koif, a shliach, even a monkey, yachol li a shliach, ela she'ena kemoisei. He could be a shliach, he just can't be a shliach shaladim kemoisei. I could send, if I send a get with a monkey to someone else, the reason why the get won't work is because that koif, that monkey, can't be like me, because I'm not a monkey, right? However, nafkamina zak the Chassam Sofer, hecha shekvida Torah shabaldin ba'atzma yasa ela she'anu ayim shlucha yavi k'mayatzma. That's only true when I'm the one who should be doing it. I need the shliach to be like me. Lazebinan din shlichos di lav hachi lo yavi k'maisei. That's why we need shlichus. If not, he wouldn't be like him. But when the Torah says specifically, send a shliach, kigoin, mishloach manos, when the Torah says send it through a shliach, you see the Chassam Sofer is also learning that sounds like you're really supposed to send it with a shliach. Zeh sagi afilu al yedei koif. You could even send a monkey. So that sounds like if you're able to send even a monkey, it probably doesn't mean the one with 2 symbols. So if that's what you're sending, it's not going to be derech kavod necessarily. It's not because it's more special when you're doing like that. So what could be the pshat that Chazal wanted that we should specifically send something al yedei shliach, shalach manos al yedei shliach? So a beautiful idea I heard from the Satmar Rebbe that there are times we find in halacha this idea of sending something through a shliach, that he frames it like this. Sometimes I could be with a friend of mine, or maybe a husband and a wife. They're eating together, so it's obvious that I'm thinking about my wife. It's obvious that I'm thinking about my friend because we're together. But what would be if someone's not present? They're in a faraway place or not in front of me, and for that reason, I send them something to know, by the way, you should know I'm thinking of you. This is before text messages were invented. So comes explains the Satmar Rebbe that could be the reason why a shliach is something that it's not because it's covered, it's special that there's someone that the shliach, the one who's bringing it, is someone special. Rather, the concept is that there's a feeling that even though you're not in front of me, I'm still thinking about you, and that's the marbereis that you could accomplish by having a shliach. So far we explained umishloach, that one word umishloach. We have a halacha, first of all, send it al yidei shliach. Why? Because that shows that you're thinking about someone who's not in front of you. Second of all, mishloach as opposed to matana, that it could be given even though he doesn't accept it. Okay? I'm going to save manos for the finale. Ish, the halacha ish. Does the person who's sending the shliach manos have to be a male? In other words, is there a chiyuv for women to do shalach manos? The Shulchan Aruch paskins lahalacha that. 1 second. Sorry, I don't have the page written down. The Ramah on the bottom of page 3. The Ramah says in the underlined part of the last picture, in the middle. V'isha chayeves b'matanis lavyonim u'mshloach manis ke'ish. A woman's mechuyev in matanis lavyonim u'mshloach manis like a man. And the Mishabura explains shakulan hayu ba'oisei nes by that finger because they were all in the nes. Go back up to the top of that page in the Pri Chodesh that we brought before when he was talking about the mechila. Right after that, he says that which the Ramah says that a woman is chayeves matanis lavyonim. Ein din zeh mechuver. It's not so clear. The ish ksiv. It says in the Torah. It says in the Megillah. Ish mishloach manos. Ish l're'eu. Ish excluding v'lo isha. And how does he know? How does the Ramah know to tell us that there's a chiyuv for women? So the Mishabura explains that the reason is that they also were in the nes of Purim. And we have a concept when it comes to Pesach, let's say, and Chanukah, that if they were involved in the nes, they also have the chiyuvim of the nes. They also have the obligations. So even if this were to be true, that because they also have they were also part of the nes, they also have the obligation, I just want to point out there still is a discrepancy. If we go with the words of the pasuk, Mishloach Manos ish l're'eu, and ish means that you're chayiv because you're a man, and the isha is not a man, so I think we have that clear. So if that's true, then the divrei Kabbalah, that which Chazal, the Nevi'im said a person has to do shalach manos, was only a man. Later on, there was a din d'Rabbanan that the Rabbanan said anyone who is involved in the nes also has a chiyuv. But that means that the level of obligation for a man and the level of obligation for a woman are not the same. I don't know if we could say a diuk or not in the Ramah. The Ramah says that women are chayiv in shalach manos like a man. Does he mean that they're the equal status of chiyuv, or he means that just like men are mechuyev, also women are mechuyev? But either way, from that lashon of ish, you see that there's a chiyuv for at least midivrei Kabbalah from that which it says in the Megillah specifically to man, and maybe on the din d'Rabbanan a woman. The last halacha, the re'eu, it says Mishloach Manos ish l're'eu. The Sfas Emes in Mesechtas Megillah, as well as the Maria Sad in Chuvas Yudat Yale, say that because the Torah says Mishloach Manos ish l're'eu, it's only a mitzvah to send shalach manos to someone who's called re'eu, and he excludes from that a Rebbe, possibly. That because a Rebbe is not called your friend. I think I told this joke before, but it's worth it. It's always good. They say that a Talmud once came to his Rebbe, and he gave him shalach manos, and the Rebbe looks at him and he goes, "It says shalach manos ish l're'eu. No, it's a Rashiva. I'm not your friend." So he said, "Who said shalach manos? Maybe it's matanas avyonim." So, but this is a non definitely not accepted, something that people would say you should not send shalach manos to your Rebbeim. Adarabba, you should definitely send shalach manos to your Rebbeim. And we'll talk about exactly the best way to send it in a second. But Shalach Manos, but that's as far as Re'eu is concerned. How much time do I have? Huh?
10 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay, here we go. Okay, so what?
12:50. I guess it was supposed to end 12:50.
Oh, it's supposed to end at 12:50. I didn't even get to.
12:55.
Huh?
12:55.
Okay, I'm gonna finish right now. 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes. There's this whole halach in Shulchan Aruch is based off of a Rambam. Always the Shulchan Aruch is coming from Rambam. You know, when he quotes it very often directly, if he could. So let's just go to page. It's on page 1 also, where it says Zmanim Hilchos Megillah Parak Beis, and listen to this Rambam. Ketzad Choyva Suda. The Rambam is talking about the chiyuv of your Suda of Purim. He says, Zu sheyochel basar, v'yisakin Suda no. You should eat basar, have a nice Suda, kefi asher timtza yodai, like however much you could expend, v'sheisa yayin, and you should drink wine, ad sheishtaka v'yirdim meshikras. V'chein, chayiv adam l'shloyach shtei manei shel basar, or shnei minei tavshil. You should send 2 portions of meat, or 2 types of cooked foods, or 2 types of food to your friend. Notice where the Rambam puts this, smack in the middle of the Suda. Sounds very much like what we're saying. That it's a Shalach Manos says something is very related to the Suda, not just stam making friends. It's making friends through the food. Shtei manos leish echad, and then he says, V'chol hamar be'lishleach l'reim meshubach. Whoever sends as much as they could or many things to your reim, to your friends, you're meshubach. Skip the last part for right now. Where did the Rambam come from when he's saying this? We saw the Gemara that talks about Shalach Manos, and we saw someone sending a bottle of wine and a yerech of a calf. Besides for that, we didn't see another type of Shalach Manos. There is one more in that Gemara right after it. We're on that page. So right after it, it says that he sent him a basket of dates and a cup of flour. He says it wasn't good. He sent him another thing that was 2 different types of foods. So there we see that you could theoretically send 2 different types of foods also. But if you look at the Lashon the Rambam, he starts off shtei manos basar, 2 portions of meat. Where did the Rambam come from to say 2 portions of meat? Every time a Rambam says something, it's very, very clearly sourced, and we have to find where he said it. And then another thing that bothers me very much in the Rambam is the Rambam says that whoever sends as much Shalach Manos as he could, hamar be'lishleach meshubach. Where do we see in the Gemara that the more you send, that's called meshubach? So on page 6, there's a Aish Dalid. This is a quote of the Rabbeinu Chananel on the page of the Gemara over there. It just got cut out in the other ones. The Rabbeinu Chananel over there says like this: Tani Rabbi Yosef, Hamshleich Manos Yisraelu, Beis Manos LaAdam Echad, Dichsev Manos Yisraelu Matanas Avyenim, Beis Manos LaBnei Adam. Now it brings our story. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, remember the story? We saw this in our Gemara also. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya, Shalach LaRabbi Shia, Yerech Shal Egel Shlishi, a thigh of a Egel Shlishi, Lebetin v'kan kan yayin, and a bottle of wine. Shalach le kiyamta banu rabbeinu matanas avyonim. He said you were mekayim matanas avyonim. Kolaymar nesinas avyonim nasatali mana achas v'hi hayerech. It's beferish. Rabbeinu Chananel says when you send wine and a yerech, you were only sending 1 mana. That was the yerech, and for that reason you could have been mekayim matanas avyonim. Shalach Manos you don't have, because there's not 2 things here. Chazer Shalach le Egel v'gimel kan yayin. So therefore he went back and he sent him a whole cow and 3 bottles of wine, and he says, "Oh, you're Mekayim Shalach Manos." So Rabbi Pesach Frank in his Mekrei Kodesh says you see from this Rabbeinu Chananel 3 halachas. You see, first of all, you can send Shalach Manos. First, he says, you can't send Shalach Manos as a liquid. Because when he sent him the wine together with the meat, he said, you only sent one thing. So you can't send a liquid. Second of all, he says, you could send Shalach Manos one mana at a time. You don't have to send two things at the same time. He sent him one, and then later he sent him a second piece of meat. So those were two pieces of meat that were sent separately. And he says the third thing you see is that you could send meat twice, and that's still called Shalach Manos. You don't have to do two. People think you have to make two different brachas. There's no such thing. You see, they're both shakol, both of the meat, right? That's what Ritzi Bezach wants to see from Rabbi Nachman. You can do this a little bit quickly. I think, Lanias Daiti, that's not the pshat. Because if we take these three halachas of Rabbi Nachman according to the way Ritzi Bezach learns, we have an issue. Why did he send him wine again? The second time he sent him a larger piece of meat with more wine. He should have just sent him the same thing, another piece of meat, and then he would have had his second manna, and that was it. So, and another ha'ara on Ritzi Bezach is also that according to the way he learns, theoretically, we said that the Bach and the Goin took out the lashon Mishloach Manos and Matanas Avyonim because you can't do those together. Here we see l'char you could do them together, because the first Yarech he said you're Yetzer Matanas Avyonim, and then he said now you're Yetzer Shalach Manos. So I think that the Rambam is coming from this Rabbeinu Chananel's understanding of the Gemara. You ready? It mamish reads beautifully. Let's go back. Now that we know the story, according to the Rambam heard the story, let's go back to the Lashon of the Rambam. It happens to be on this page also, page 6, hey. And let's read this halacha. Sorry, right before that. 2 portions of meat. That's exactly what happened over here. He sent 2 portions of meat. Or 2 other types of foods, which is the hemshech of the Gemara. The Gemara continues that there was a different type of Shalach Manos that was not meat, it was whatever, wheat or something like that. And then he says, or 2 different types of food. I don't understand. He just said already 2 different types of food. What's he saying by saying 2 types of food? Food and not liquid. He's saying that I think the Rambam's paskening lahalacha that you can't use liquid as a Shalach Manos. And then he says, "V'kol hamar b'l'shleich l'reim meshubach." Whoever adds to sending to their friends is meshubach. I think what the Rambam is doing over here is explaining why he sent the extra wine. The first wine that he sent, he was told it's not good for Shalach Manos. So why would he send wine the second time? The teretz is because even if something's not good for Shalach Manos itself, but it makes the whole presentation more special, that's extra kiyum of Shalach Manos. That's what the Rambam saw in the Gemara over there. If that's true, then I think just for our sake, intents and purposes, you see that if someone were to send you Shalach Manos, besides for 2 foods in it, it has all this nice, people do poems and shtiklach Torah, I'm sure that's what you're going to send to your Rabbeim, and svarim and things like that. What are you doing to the Shalach Manos? It's a nice thing, but it's not part of Shalach Manos. So I would just say, I think based on this Rambam, that as long as it adds to the geshmak, the overall geshmak of the Shalach Manos, you could include that in the mitzvah of Shalach Manos. That's part of the marbel of Shalach Manos l'reim.